All right, here we are again. Boy, lots of videos today. This time we're going to talk about moving everything to AsciiDoc. And by everything, I mean getting rid of Markdown. Why would you ever get rid of Markdown? Somebody I know you out there are like, "What the hell, Rob? I thought you made Peg so you could lint and standardize your subversion of Markdown." I mean, your specific version of Markdown. If you deconstruct that sentence, you'll get all of the answers without even knowing anything else in this video. Um, so the reason that I am moving to AsciiDoc primarily above everything else is that it is one standard. It's one defined standard with a very strong specification and full support for GitHub, for publishing, and we just learned for ReadTheDocs. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit of story here. It's actually on the screen if you want to read it. But Kris Nova, the late Kris Nova, God rest her soul. I mean, she was amazing. She chose to use AsciiDoc way back when to do hacking capitalism. And I remember seeing her using AsciiDoc, and I trust all of her technical decisions implicitly. She doesn't make any technical decision lightly. And so for her to throw out what would be very clearly the, widely accepted Markdown standard out there for documentation, really got me to raise my eyebrow. I mean, I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And so as I approached writing my own books, I've got several books started. I've started writing one in Scrivener, which we'll get to later, because another person who is a big writer also started with Scrivener and ended up with AsciiDoc and justified their transition to this. There's a link in the description to that. And so, I took this thing that I have been promoting at a major level and writing tons of code for my current keg script. My little cast into my keg and everything is all based on Markdown. And I am now in the middle of migrating everything to AsciiDoc. I may hit some things along the way, but I wanted to make a relatively brief video of my conclusions. If you want to watch a long-winded video of me finding all of this out, go watch today's date. What's today's date? I don't even know. But there'll be a VOD, a live VOD. It's got me going through all of this determination for myself. But let's get right into it. So what does AsciiDoc even look like? Here's a README file that displays on GitHub like this. It ends in .adoc. That is the most common way that you are going to see this appear. I tried AD, it didn't work. You can do full AsciiDoc. And it used to be I would see people using ADoc and I would complain, like, why are you not using Markdown? Markdown's the standard. And we're going to get into why Markdown is really never been a standard for anything, and in a second. But for right now, let's just look at what AsciiDoc looks like. So as you can see, it's the same thing. We got our titles here, we got our links here. It renders fine, is fully supported by GitHub. And for most people, that's going to be the primary criteria. It's not going to be how easy is it to learn or maintain. It's going to be, does it work on GitHub? Because that's how they write their issues. That's how they write all kinds of things, right? You can use, and frankly, you're going to probably still need to use Markdown if you want to use any kind of formatting inside of issues and PRs and things like that. I think the default for that is Markdown, so it's still worth learning Markdown. But as you'll see quickly, this is not too different. So, it uses equal signs instead of hashtags, right? One of my favorite things is how it uses URLs. So URLs are just kind of after the fact, you'll see there. And other than that, it automatically knows about URLs, just barreling URLs, which is an extension, by the way, to Markdown and other things. So what's wrong with Markdown? What's wrong with Markdown is actually best covered on the Common Mark standard page, which is the closest thing Markdown has ever had to a standard, which still is not a standard. And if you come to Common Mark, we're going to read this. Why is Common Mark needed? So you could read all of this. Why is AsciiDoc needed, right? It's important to note, too, that Common Mark came out in 2014 and AsciiDoc came out in 2013. So about, around that time, structured text, simplified text formatting things sort of came back into vogue. And it's kind of funny for those of us who are old enough to remember things like God, was it VisiCalc and other things? There's been a lot of the first, before there was word processors, there was, putting stars around things to make them italicized. That has been around since the dawn of word processors, period. So, this idea of markup, that's what markup is, integrating tokens and things with regular text to have it tell the renderer what to do with the text. And that's where the term Markdown comes from, because it's kind of like a thumb your nose at markup, HTML hypertext markup language. So who created Markdown? So Gruber and Schwartz. Everybody knows that I regularly dedicate the beginner boost to Aaron Schwartz, probably the greatest autodidact of our time, an amazing human being who died way too tragically, and John Gruber, who has been a big podcasting loudmouth for a long time, very opinionated, very annoying fellow, my kind of person. but he's he doesn't want anything to do with it. He's also a Perl advocate. He wrote it because he just wanted something better, and he's since stepped away. And John JGM, the other guy, the guy who made Pandoc and who proposed the standard, has tried to get John to sit down and help standardize Markdown, and he's like, nah, I don't care. And that pretty much summarizes the problem with Markdown. Nobody cares, and it was never properly specified. And JGM, who's a Berkeley philosophy professor, who regularly writes materials and didn't want to write it in LaTeX, which is amazing but crazy hard, said, okay, I'm going to use Markdown for that, but this isn't good enough. So then he made Pandoc. And you guys know Pandoc, right? Pandoc is an amazing tool that everybody should learn. It's actually the standard documentation format for the R language is to write it in Pandoc. It's been adopted highly by universities all over the place. And spoiler alert, JGM invented his own version of Pandoc, of Markdown, called Pandoc Flavored Markdown, not to be confused with GitHub Flavored Markdown or Common Mark or Markuria or any of the other ones that are out there, including MakeDocs, which, by the way, MakeDocs also extends Markdown, and therein lies the problem. The problem with Markdown is there is no standard. There never was a standard. There still isn't a standard, I would maintain, and there never will be a standard for Markdown. And that's coming from a guy who followed his own advice to don't get mad, get busy, and I made PEG, which is this parsing expression grammar, just so I could write subsyntaxes in Markdown that I could then lint and be sure were the right thing, right? Just for that exact purpose. And had I known about AsciiDoc at the time, I wouldn't have done any of that. Because AsciiDoc has been very, very strictly specialized and specified, and it has been very, very strictly maintained, and it includes at its core the ability to extend it as a part of the language specification. When it came out in 2013, there were a few people that were scratching their heads saying, man, this Markdown is fantastic, but my God, it's a mess. And let's read about more of the mess that Markdown is. So, in the absence of a spec, early implementers consulted the original Markdown.pl Perl code to resolve these ambiguities, but Markdown.pl was quite buggy and manifestly bad results in many cases. I've actually seen these specifically, so it was not satisfactory replacement for any kind of spec. Also, it was last updated in 2004, and Gruber doesn't want anything to do with it. Because there is no unambiguous spec, implementations have diverged considerably over the last 10 years. As a result, users are often surprised to find that a document that renders one way on one system renders differently on another one. All of these problems, by the way, are very well documented thanks to JGM, who made Pandoc, who submitted successfully several RFCs to the IETF documenting the problems with Markdown. This was all before he got everybody to sit down at the table at the time and adopt the Common Mark standard, right? And let's keep going. Because there is no unambiguous spec, many things have diverged in 10 years. As a result, users are often surprised that their document is one way on one thing and another way on another thing. To make matters worse, because nothing in Markdown counts as a syntax error, the divergence isn't even discovered right away. In other words, the reason that we all use type-based languages, the reason that Go and Rust and Crystal and anything with LLVM in it won. Why did they win? Because strictly typed things can be compiled and catch errors at compile time instead of runtime. right? Because it's got a specification that defines the type. Same reason that you would want to use a structured text formatting markup language that has a standard, because then you can apply the standard in advance and check to see if it's there. You cannot do that. Not to mention the fact that you have to pass through the document twice. Because of the way it's been written, you have to parse the whole thing twice. And if you can maintain HTML support, which the markdown.pl file requires, you also have to build into anything that's Markdown a fully compliant HTML parser, right? And so there's no doubt in my mind why the Pandoc specific version of Markdown says no HTML, and the GitHub flavor Markdown says, well, you can use these tags in HTML, right? So that by just opening the can of worms saying, well, if it doesn't work, just use HTML. Try to build a parser for that. Try to build any kind of linter for that. It's impossible. It's physically impossible to do it. There's just no way, because HTML is an evolving standard all the time anyway. You have to lock down, well, what version of HTML are we talking about? It's an absolute disaster. And there's no standard test suite for Markdown. MD test comes closest thing. The only way to resolve Markdown ambiguities and inconsistencies is BabelMark, which compares the output of 20 plus implementation of Markdown against each other to see if a consensus emerges. We propose a standard unambiguous syntax specification of Markdown with a common suite of test suites. Now, as well-intentioned as this is, what you're going to immediately see is that we will call it Markdown, common mark, right? But in order to get this standard common mark, which they've all agreed to adopt now, they had to say, okay, we're going to all agree to support common mark plus. So GFM and Pandoc plus and Pandoc mark and all those things, they're not compliant with each other. They have common mark, but they've all added more on. And so they got it. They got a way for them to document the extensions into their basic stuff, and they were able to derive out a very, very rudimentary. It's for everything. This is mostly about writing, period. So why do I care? Because I want the format that I pick to be supported to make websites, to be supported to make notes and readable readmes on GitHub, and to be able to publish paper documents, books. And AsciiDoc does that. Markdown does not do that. Okay, Markdown does not do that. And some versions, MetaMark, which is an extension of Markdown, Markuia on LeanPub, it does too. MakeDocs has its own extension. They're all extensions of Markdown, and all of them diverge from one another. And they're not even all common mark compliant. So JGM was like, okay, can we at least all of us agree that we want to agree on a common base? And so they had to eliminate crap all over the place to get to common mark. And when they arrived at common mark, everyone's okay, now we finally have some agreement. But everyone looked at it and scratched their head and like, this is completely useless by itself. It doesn't include tables, for example. It doesn't include footnotes. It doesn't include anything pretty much that anybody would want. In fact, very few things even support common mark, and they couldn't even get Discord to adopt it and Slack reliably. So it failed. The common mark project failed, in my opinion. And I mean, the effort was very valiant, and I think they did a great thing. But the fact that it still hasn't even been done, it says where in 2014 when you started common mark, and I mean, a lot of these things don't exist anymore. And Meteor comes to mind. And they've all decided to kind of go their own way. And they did get, pretty close. They decided to do some really weird things in the project, such as using Markdown to define their unit tests that are then extracted out. By the way, I think this is amazing. One of their examples is actually saying, what is Markdown, right? My favorite thing about this is they actually use the comparison to AsciiDoc to show how Markdown has problems in its specification and AsciiDoc does not, which is all by itself an advertisement for AsciiDoc. Here's a sample of AsciiDoc from the AsciiDoc manual, blah, blah, blah. And you can go about the reading of those things. So this video is primarily to justify the choice, but I want to go through some of the pros and cons and actually the primary use cases, which I already said. So the first criteria that got me looking at this was, can I make a book in this, and I was going to rewrite Skill Stack as a book. The Beginner Boost, particularly, I was going to rewrite that as a book, and I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it with Markdown. So I went to LeanPub, and I was going to have to learn yet another flavor of Markdown, Markuia. As you can see already in my my MakeDocs document, I've got annotations and things in there that are not Markdown compliant, so I cannot use that code to make a book at all. Not even in Markdown. I would actually have to write a translator to go from MakeDocs Markdown into Markuia, which does annotations completely differently. Those things are already built in and included in AsciiDoc and were thought of from the very beginning, from the first day. So there's no surprise to me that Kris Nova, one of the most intelligent human beings I've ever known, chose to, and practical human beings, chose to use AsciiDoc for hacking capitalism and many other books that she's done. So I went ahead and went forward with this thinking, okay, but my requirements are I want to be able to do a website from it. So let's talk about that for a second. Can you make a website in AsciiDoc? Yes, you can. In fact, we discovered that, so this is Antora. In fact, Antora is so amazing that at one point, ReadTheDocs, they approached them saying, can you please make Antora work with ReadTheDocs? And we're going to talk about that in a second. So Antora docs, this is documentation. This is searchable documentation, which to my knowledge is actually better. It's, you know, it's written in Node, and you guys know this is a good example of why I don't care as long as it works. I don't care what the implementation language is. A really great decision on the Antora docs generator is that they have chosen to make searchability a separate extensional component to the generation of the static site documentation by itself. So if you know static site generation, you know things like Hugo and Next.js and all that. And you know, there's a lot of that. So Antora is the AsciiDoc equivalent of that. And it, you know, it generates great documentation, but the searching has to be layered in on top of that. So I haven't got into the details of the search engine indexing, but I can tell you that MakeDocs indexing is trash. I have personally seen it fall on its face with over 200 pages. I tried to use MakeDocs for my Zettelkasten, and I just put it on there, and I was waiting around for 12 minutes for the thing to finish making a typo update while doing live updates. You can turn on something called dirty so that it doesn't auto-update the index for the whole thing every time. But as I got pulling back the layers, I saw that the way that they have implemented the index, which is a single file, there's no way to not generate that file every time and update it with every single word in the entire site. The fundamental architecture of MakeDocs is really, really significantly flawed. And Antora at least is going to be as flawed as that, but it's, you know, we have the chance of it being slightly better. And there are other ways to make searchable content. So most of the time when people are doing this kind of thing, they're not live viewing their updates all the time. And I've made 2 or 3 static site generators, and I've never, ever had that. In my case with Pandoc, for example, I would have each page stand independently and produce its own metadata, and then that metadata would be combined dynamically very easily because the index didn't have to update all of the memory every time. I don't want to get into the details of it, but this search is pretty damn good. So if we go here, we can see that it actually has the same keys and lookups and stuff that you would get if you were, I mean, it's got all the same things you would see in Hugo, or MakeTheDocs has become kind of the standard format with the table of contents on the right, and you know the sort of the twisties over here on the left. So this is Antora, and this shows that yes, you can make a site like my skill stack site. This is MakeDocs right now. You know, as you can see, you can like Markdown here. This is a little bit more, you know, it shows a little bit, there's our schedule and everything. These annotations are completely, let me show you. To get an annotation in MakeDocs, this is me telling you why I don't like it. So there's a table, right? And here is an annotation. This is not valid Markdown. This is something that was added by MakeDocs, and it's a MakeDocs only kind of thing. These things are, as far as I know, they're supported independently here. Another thing really great with AsciiDoc is it has built-in support for line numbering. Like inline annotations for 1, 2, and 3. I have actually seen books published with AsciiDoc. Have you guys ever seen one of these? I didn't know where it came from, and now I know. So I've read books. I've read books that have like a snippet of code, and then it has to the right of the the kind of the code call out, it'll have like a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or like that. That calling out and referring to those numbers on those lines without having all the line numbers on the left is supported by AsciiDoc by default. It's part of the standard. So if you want to refer to a specific line of text of any kind, code or whatever, you can do that and it's supported in the call. That is, there's nothing anywhere like that in any form of Markdown at all. The closest you could do would be to put an inline comment or to do all line numbers and then refer to the line number. The ability to do that all by itself is enough to push most publishers, most people that want to do publishing anyway, toward AsciiDoc. So Antora is the tool of choice for doing this presentation. Most people that are doing MakeDocs might do it because they want to use ReadTheDocs. And we were able to find a, here we go. Here's some more AsciiDoc.org. You can go there. I don't know where it is right now, but there was a thread that we found that talks about AsciiDoc being generated into, it's now supported by ReadTheDocs, right? So ReadTheDocs, and ReadTheDocs is a very common feature. A lot of people will use MakeDocs so that they can use ReadTheDocs so that their documentation is automatically indexed and searchable. And actually anything, as I understand it, anything on ReadTheDocs can be published right off the bat. So there are a lot of people that use ReadTheDocs for lots of reasons. And it is free for open source projects, if I remember right. Yeah, some of them are paid, but not all. So it says Sphinx MakeDocs Jupyter book, and I was actually kind of frustrated by that it wasn't going to support it, and I spent about an hour trying to find it with the help of my crew here, and we found, and now I'm having a hard time searching it. It's not here. Where's the documentation? Docs is code. Maintain. Get started now. Sign up. I don't want to sign up. Explore all the features. Yes. Where's the search? I don't know. There it is. No. Where is their search? Read the docs. Actually, there's a link. Is it .org? I'm trying to find the search part function that we were just using just earlier. There's a way to go. I think we probably have to find some docs about a specific topic. I think that's the problem. Is it readthedocs.org? I think it might be. Yeah. Wait, no, it's not. What am I missing? It's docs.readthedocs.io. Okay. Readthedocs.io. Yep. Well, that's why I had a hard time finding it. Docs.readthedocs.io. There we go. Okay, so this is what people want. They want to be able to search all their documentation over here and get it and have it be, they don't have to host it, right? ReadTheDocs hosts it for free. And so there is, they do understand AsciiDoc is a thing. ReadTheDocs.yaml, this is what it would look like. So the point is, ReadTheDocs supports AsciiDoc as of, I think it was January 2022. From the thank you Pink Rubber Boots, by the way. We were reading through the change ticket that was actually requested back in 2014. It sat dormant until about 2022. ReadTheDocs added the ability to plug in the build tools, and that's what this is about. And so you can now, I haven't done this yet, but that means that you can have full support for ReadTheDocs for your documentation. So not only can you, and we haven't talked about GitHub yet, but rather than using, GitHub Pages, you can have a GitHub action that'll build your site, your documentation site. So you have your standalone version, but you can also include readthedocs.yaml so that it'll get picked up if you qualify and get documented on ReadTheDocs as well. So your documentation can become part of this big, massive knowledge base on readthedocs.io. If you're doing anything in the educational realm, those are really great things. You have searchable, structured content using a well-established conventional way of documenting things, particularly for technology and coding. But you also have the ability to render that as a publication and put an EPUB. You can either do an EPUB through ReadTheDocs, which has their own EPUB and DocBook conversion, or you can just make your own using AsciiDoc or any number of other methods of generating content, including Pandoc. You can go from Pandoc, from AsciiDoc, into any of the other EPUB or Kindle formats, no problem. It is kind of cool that AsciiDoc has built-in support for embedded images and illustrations that then become a part. In fact, there's a converter. There's a converter for SVG built into AsciiDoc, the baseline one, that will create files that can become EPUBs directly. That means using PNG, GIF, JPEG, or SVGs, they can become first-class citizens in your document, even though they're included just like you would in Markdown, just a different syntax. So this to summarize in this video, the reason that I am converting all of my stuff, including my Zet tool, to use AsciiDoc, which will probably be a configurable option if people want to use it. They still want to use hashtags for their headlines instead of single equal signs. The primary reasons that I'm going to AsciiDoc are, one, I can completely replace skillstack.io and still have everything about it functionally be the same, searchability. Two, it's still going to be usable by ReadTheDocs. Three, I'm going to be able to publish the content that I maintain in a single source as a book, as well as free and open PDF and online searchable content. And that was the primary driver for all of this. The primary driver for all of this is I wanted to be able to have, for those who want a book, I wanted to be able to let them have a readable book that they can flip through, or a Kindle book or something like that. If they want to support me, they can buy the Kindle book for like $5 or whatever. And, they could carry that around with them and then search through it at their own time or leisure. But I also wanted the flexibility of having something that I can maintain, and that can be versioned, and then I can update at regular intervals, and then it would just be available anytime. And it appears that AsciiDoc is the best option for that. So far, all my tests have confirmed that is true. Had I not been able to maintain the ease of use with GitHub, particularly previewing READMEs and stuff like that, I might have been given a moment of pause. Had I not been able to use the baseline format to convert to any other format, including Word, in using something like Pandoc. Believe it or not, there are people that still, that's all they can use is Word. So, for example, if I wanted to give a group of teachers who only have Word this document, I could produce it as a PDF or as Word, or I could send them the whole site and say, here's how you host it yourself, or I could send them a paper book. I have more options with AsciiDoc than I will ever have with Markdown, and more consistency and more sustainability. That is the reason I'm switching. It is a tremendous Herculean effort for me to do this, because I have spent the last 12 years writing content in Markdown. But that's why I'm doing it. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. Go ahead and come grill me. And I'll probably gripe about something as usual, but right now, this is the reason I'm going here. So I just wanted to put that out there for everybody. Thanks. We'll talk to you later.